Hello, I'm Jason Lightoller from Woodside. Today we're going to be talking about cut and sew. And a lot of people avoid this like the plague because the thought of actually cutting into the knitwear that they produced fills them with horror. But I haven't done any fully fashioned necklines, which means that you literally transfer stitch by stitch. I haven't done that particular method for many years, at least 20 years. I've done cut and sew for as long as I can remember, and I've never ever had a problem. It's the go-to method, and I think it's the neatest. The main one being is that for back necks, on most patterns, it gives a straight section. It's very rare on a pattern that you get back neck shaping, and our anatomical differences do not allow for back necks that are straight. And I actually prefer that. I prefer the round neck at the back. And also, the sign of a homemade garment is unfortunately the neckline that gives it away. Very often on a homemade garment, you'll find that with a fully fashioned neckline, you get a very box-like appearance. So if it tells you to cast off at the center and then you cast off as you decrease up, going upwards, those decreases do notice. It's this point here that it's a pure giveaway. So with the cut and sew, you can actually get a really smooth rounded neckline, and I'm going to show you how to do that. There are a few caveats to this method though. The main one being is that it works best with a sandwich band. It doesn't work very well with a single type neckband. However, that is possible if you use an overlocking machine and you don't mind the overlocking stitches showing on the inside. You can cover those up if you use some twill tape, and if you look at the video how to make a pullover hoodie, I show you how to use the overlocker with the twill tape. If you look at the video that I showed you on how to attach a neckband, a round neckband with the overlocker, you can see what the difference is if you put the neckband on using the overlocker and the stitches are showing. But I'm going to show you two methods of doing cut and sew today. One is actually cutting out the shapes with the overlocking machine, and the other one is using a standard sewing machine. Now there are several different templates for cut and sew necklines, especially round necklines out there. You can get some that you can download from the internet and print out on pieces of card. This one is a fixed template and it's got several different sizes. It's by a company called Carl Boyd, and you can actually choose the depth that you want. This one ranges from 3.5 inches deep to a minimum of 3 inches. And you can choose the width of your neckline, and it ranges from 8 inches down to 6.5. And take into account that this only accounts for 1/2 of the neck, i.e. the front, which is this here, and the back here. So if you want a neckline that is 16 inches wide, you would then choose 8 inches for the front and the 8-inch mark for the back. And the way it works is that, so for instance here, I'm going to pretend that I want a neckline of 3 inches deep, so I would choose this line here, and I want a neckline at the front which is 6.5 inches wide, so I'm going to use this marker here. I would then put this mark here in line with the top of the jumper, so at the shoulder points, and I would ensure that this mark here is in line with my center 0 mark that I have put my yarn markers on at the needles at 0 on the knitting machine. And in this case, obviously, this is going to be where the blades of these scissors are. So what I would do is I would then align this mark here, the 6.5 inches mark, and chalk around until I get to the top of the jumper, which in this case I've lined up with the 3-inch mark. I would then move the template over to the corresponding mark of 6.5 inches, which is this outer one here, and then chalk all the way round until I get to the other shoulder there. And that is how the template works. And of course, when you get to the back, you would do the same for that side. So for the back neck, you would move the template marker there and then align it up for the back neck center 0 mark and go from there round to the shoulder and then across from there round to the other shoulder. So another set of templates that's available are fixed templates, and these come in individual sizes. This particular one of mine is very well used. It's from a company called BSK, which stands for Bedford Sewing and Knitting. However, unfortunately, this company is no longer in operation. And it works on the same principle, except this time you choose the individual size. So say for instance, you want a front neckline of 7 inches, you choose that individual template of 7 inches and the corresponding back neckline template of 7 inches. And the way it works is exactly the same as it does with the Carl Boyd template. You choose the depth of the neckline, so in this case it's 3 inches, 3 1/4 or 3 1/2. You line the center of the template up with your yarn marker that you would have put at 0, and you put these lines here, which is the depth of your neckline, up in line with the top of your jumper, and then you go all the way around your template, and then that is how you mark it. And of course you choose the same with your back neckline, so you would put that in line with your yarn marker at the center point of 0, and you just go all the way around. The only difference with this one is that you don't do it in 2 separate halves, because of course it's one size that's fixed. Now on this pretend jumper, this is the front part and this is the back part. What you would ordinarily do is have to stop the punch card here and then make a note of the row number, continue with your patterning on the left side, all the while you are shaping your neck, and then you'd have to roll it back and then start all over again. And really, cut and sew negates all of that fuss and bother. What it will do is allow you to just knit straight up to here, shape your shoulders, and then you can just literally cut out your neckline. And it really is a much more reliable way. For those enviable people who can actually shape your necklines and then readjust your punch card, I really applaud you, because it's just not something I can do, particularly those who use the electronic machines. I have tried it quite a few times and I've really messed it up. So as I say, cut and sew is the way to go for me. This is going to be an 8-inch wide front neckline. So I'm going to put the 3 1/4 inch mark here at the top of the jumper, which is this point here, this shoulder seam, and both edges are aligned with the shoulder. This is my middle point there, my yarn marker, so that's in line with the center. Let's get those in line there. And I'm now going to just chalk all the way around, and I'm going to do it in 2 bold, deliberate moves. So that's 1, and here's the second one, like that. And here, as you can see, is the outline of the neck. Now you don't have to use chalk, you can use a pencil, you can use a felt tip pen, you can use a dressmaker's pen, it's entirely down to you. But this is not going to be seen anyway, because it's going to be inside the neckband and the stitches will be covering it anyway. And it's the same principle with the back neck template. I've got the center lined up, it's at both shoulder points there, and we're going to chalk round in 2 bold, deliberate moves. And there we are. So we're going to go over to the overlocking machine now, and we're going to start here, and we're going to go all the way around here, right across, making sure that those 2 chalk marks line up perfectly with the front and the back, all the way around the back seam, and then we're going to finish off at this back shoulder here. And when you are chalking out on Fair Isle or any pattern knitting, make sure that you are chalking from the front and not from the reverse side, because if you chalk from the reverse side, which has floats on it, you will distort your floats and there is a danger that they will get caught up. So that's important. It doesn't particularly matter if you're chalking out on just plain stockinette stitch, but it does if you are doing patterning. Now there are 2 ways of starting off your seam, regardless of what fabric you're using when you are at the overlocker. One of them is to get the machine running and then just move the fabric underneath the foot here, and the other one is to just raise the foot up before you start the machine off and put your fabric right at the starting point. When you are using knitwear, that's the method you should be using all the time. If you don't do that and you start the machine and then run the fabric under with knitting, it will distort it out of shape as the machine grabs it. So I've got the blade lined up with the chalk mark, and we're going to go around, and we'll start off now. One thing I haven't mentioned is that I've got the differential feed set at 1.5 and the stitch length at 2.5. So you just keep going round, and I'm using a 4-thread system here, and as you can see, I've actually got it set up in black threads. All the threads are black, and of course if you was doing this for a proper jumper,
then you would be using threads that match. This is a pretend jumper, and it's just because I had some leftover yarn. And the reason why I'm using a contrast thread is so you can see what steps I'm taking. And we're now at the point in the shoulder seam here, and it's just going to join up directly with the chalk mark that we made for the back, and you just go across. And you meet it up here with the back chalk mark, and all the way around. And we're now coming off at the other shoulder point, and at this point you do run the machine right off. Make sure that you actually catch the other shoulder point here. If you don't, then sometimes the blade will actually miss it and you will not catch the stitch there. And then just take the scissors and snip off. So just to recap where we are so far, what I did is I joined one shoulder seam, we marked out the front and the back neck, and we've overlocked it all the way around in a circle. And this is what it looks like from the outside. And this is the impression from the inside, and as you can see, all the floats from the Fair Isle patterning are securely in place with the overlocker. So what I'm doing here is I'm just lifting it gently onto the gate pegs because I want to see the entire neckline, how many stitches I need to knit the neckband, and I'm applying just a little bit of stretch. You do need to apply some stretch, but not too much. And I can see that I need to knit a band 140 stitches wide. Now, you can choose whatever style you want to, providing it's a sandwich band. You can use a stockinette band, you can use a ribbed band, a rolled band, or an industrial band. It's entirely down to you. So I have done a video on how to do an industrial band and a rolled band. You can have a look at that and employ that if you want to. I'm just going to do a simple 1x1 ribbed band for this occasion, and I'll show you how it looks. So I've rehung the entire neckline onto the knitting machine needles here, the 140 needles, and what I've done is I've made sure that it is literally just underneath the overlocking stitches here, as you can see. If you look closely, you can see this overlocking here, and here obviously are the needles. So make sure that you don't pierce through the overlocking stitches. It has to be directly underneath it. And it would be the same if you were using a linking machine. Make sure that the pins are immediately underneath the overlocking seam there. My linking machine is still up in the Great Knitting Circle in the sky, and I haven't got a replacement yet, so everything is being done on the knitting machine. So that's the first edge of the neckband on, and I'm now just going to pull this through. So as I explained in other neckline videos, make sure you do this in 2 stages, because otherwise the latches could come undone and then it will pierce through the overlocking stitches here. And once you've got to this stage, you just deliberately and boldly go all the way through. Now the next stage is to move the needles back out into holding position, and that's greatly achieved if you press this edge, this overlocking edge, back down to the gate pegs on the machine, and then just move a few needles out at a time. If you don't do that, then what can happen is that these needles will pierce straight through this overlocking edge here and the first edge of the neckband that you've put on, and then the machine will jam up. Now the next stage is to hang the other edge of the neckband onto these needles, and that will enclose the raw edge. Now the next stage is to ensure that this edge is right up against the gate pegs, and we're going to remove the waste yarn. And don't be nervous about that. I was nervous about it for many years, about removing waste yarn while the live stitches were still on the needles. And it really does work, and it helps immensely to get the carriage across this new part of the knitting, because there's a lot of bulk there and you want to reduce it. So that's one section off, and we'll do the other section underneath here. So we're now removing the waste yarn that is against the neck edge, and that will also help the carriage go across. And again, we'll just move this right up against there, and as you can see, there's hardly any bulk there at all. And what we're going to do,
Don't be tempted to pull these live stitches here through the other set, because if you do that, the neckline won't stretch at all. And we're going to rethread the carriage, loosen the tension as far as it can possibly go, and we're going to make 2 passes. And what we're going to do now is just a latch tool bind off. Now, I always advocate doing the latch tool bind off, sometimes called the loop through loop bind off, over the gate peg bind off. I find the gate peg bind off for this particular purpose is a little bit too rigid and it doesn't stretch enough. And the latch tool bind off is greatly helped if you do the last 2 rows at the loosest tension. Some people will only do 1 row, but I find that 2 rows is absolutely fine for this purpose. So I've joined the remaining shoulder seam using the exact same method, and again I'm casting off using the latch tool, and then the next stage is just to give the neckline a gentle steam. So here we are then with the very bright orange and cream coloured Fair jumper, and this is the cut and sew neckline. Everything is perfectly aligned there, and I'm just going to turn the mannequin round so you can see that the back neck is perfectly rounded and very smooth indeed. And here is the inside. As you can see, all the floats are totally enclosed all the way around inside this neckband here, and there is no way that that would come undone. And it's a really good way of putting a neckband on if you don't want to mess around resetting the punch card. So I've gone past the point where I would start the underarm shaping, and I'm now at the point where in the pattern it's starting to tell me here where I would put the needles in hold and start the neckline shaping, but I'm going to totally ignore that and knit straight up to the point where I would start the shoulder slope shaping using short rows. So I've decreased both shoulders. I think you can just see the margin here. I've decreased both shoulders using short rows, so therefore that's the shoulder slope, and here is the neck opening as defined by the pattern, and as you can see there is no shaping at all to the neck, it's just completely knitted straight up. And I've put a marker in here which is the center of the neck, and what I'm going to do is now take this off on waste yarn. Take the carriage over the outside and make sure that your waste yarn is lying over the edge of the needles here. You can just see it. If you don't do that, what will happen is that all the knitting will drop off this part here, and that's obviously not what you want. So go across slowly, make sure that the carriage is also set in hold, go across slowly, the first row, ensure that everything is caught, and yes, this is. And then what we're going to do is just go back a few times and then we'll take it off. I actually dropped a stitch there, so I'm just going to fix it. There we are. So now we'll just go across a few times on waste yarn. We'll just snip that off there. And then we'll remove the middle section. We can take that off. And then what we're going to do now is just take off each shoulder on waste yarn. But obviously, because this has been short rowed, we need to do just one row, one final row with main yarn at the correct tension.
So this is one half of the jacket front, and I'm at the point where I'm going to start doing the short rows for the shoulder shaping. And as you can see here, this is going to be a round neck jacket front, and as you can see here, there is totally no shaping on the neckline, just as I did for the back part. There was no back neck shaping here either. And I've put the first needle selection into hold, and I'm going to continue with the neck shaping, and I'll come back on camera and show you what happens after that. So this is the shoulder shaping, and it's been done by using partial knitting or short rows, and this is the point here that is going to be taken off onto waste yarn, because again this is going to be a cut and sew neckline, a half neckline in the round, and this bit would have been removed by decreasing stitches to give the round shape. And I'm just going to go across now, and we're just going to remove this section onto waste yarn, and then we'll take it fully off the machine. So there we are. I've done about 12 rows of waste yarn here. And always be generous with your waste yarn if ever you're using this method to cast off. I once saw somebody on a tutorial who only did 3 rows of waste yarn, and honestly my heart nearly went into fibrillation. So I'm going to take this off the machine completely now. So the last thing to do just before I remove this onto waste yarn is to close off these wrapped needles here where I did the short rows, and that's important. If you don't do that, it leaves a really unsightly seam when you go to graft the two edges together. Some people don't do that, and of course the choice is entirely up to you, but I find it makes a really nice graft. So what I've done is gone back to main garment tension and obviously put the main yarn in, and we'll just go across now. And what I'm going to do now is just go to the waste yarn and we will just remove it off onto waste yarn. This is the shoulder section here. This is the front neck point, sometimes known as the gorge, and this is starting of the back here, the back neck. And an unavoidable consequence is that you sometimes get this part here, which is a gap between the last shoulder stitch here and the start of the neck shaping. And if you want to do a really nice, neat cut and sew neck, then you need to close this gap off. And it's the same here. This is the shoulder stitch, the last shoulder stitch, and the first part of the gorge there. And it's quite a simple thing. You just take your latch tool and you put it in to the first stitch of the neck point, go behind the latch, and then you take the last stitch of the shoulder point and you pull it through. And then you go across to the first stitch of the gorge, and then you pull that through there like that, and then you bring it behind the latch, and then you take the yarn that would have been used to cast off, and then you pull that through. And then what that does, if I just take these pins out that I've used to secure it to the board, what that does, that closes the gap off, and we will be using this to create our nice curved line to start our front and back neck shaping. So now we're going to look at a jacket front, specifically a round neck jacket front. As you can see, I've already chalked the back neck section. There's no need to repeat it here. The process is exactly the same as what I showed you for the jumper. Now this is actually, we're going to do this in 2 half sections. So it's the same as what we did for the front neck on the jumper, except you put the center line of the template on 1 half of the front there, and again you choose the depth, and then you line half of the center, which in this case is the 8-inch template. If you wanted a narrower neckline, then you would of course use a narrower template. And for this instance, we're going to say that we want a 3-inch depth, so I'm going to put the 3-inch mark along the top line of where the shoulder point is there, and we're going to make sure that that's aligned up with the shoulder point that joins the back there. And if you make sure that both shoulder points are in line, you'll actually get this perfectly straight. Make sure that the center line is on the front there, and then you chalk round as we did before in 2 bold deliberate actions, and there is your front neck point marked out. You would of course do the same for the other side. You just reverse the template and you would chalk around that line. And using cut and sew for a front neck jacket is a lot easier than if you were to do it in pattern and then doing a fully fashioned decrease, particularly if you were to use ferrule pattern, because that's a complete nightmare when you're trying to relocate your punch card. You can just knit straight up to the shoulder point, and then you can actually use this as your template to cut out. And there we are, that's the entire neckline for the jacket or the cardigan, marked out there, ready to go under the overlocker. And as you can see, what I did is I had it pinned out onto the board before I marked it out. It's a lot easier to do it that way because it stops all the slipping and sliding that you sometimes get if you just have it on a standard cutting board. Here's the neckline now that it's been under the overlocking machine. I didn't show that process because it's exactly the same as what it was for the jumper. At this point, you would make a decision as to whether you put your front bands on now to have them extending up over the side edge of your neckline, or whether you put them on after you've put your neckband on and have them extending underneath it. The decision is entirely down to you. In this case, I'm just going to put the neckline on now and show you what it looks like. And here is the pretend jacket in a raspberry colour.
well, at least I think it's raspberry, I'm not quite sure. And what I did here is just a plain stocking neckband. Now, of course, you can make this as high or as low as you want to. I think I did about 10 rows here. And what I did is I started off at garment tension, and then as I got to the fold row, I gradually decreased the tension so it got tighter as it got to the fold row, and then I reversed the process. And the reason why I did that is because I wanted the stitches to pull in as it actually got to the fold row, and what that does, it prevents it from folding outwards like that. And as you can see, it actually pulls in tighter and it lays against the neck. If I didn't do that, you'll find that it would flap outwards. And again, this is the shoulder point here, and this is the round front neck part of the jacket or the cardigan, whichever you want to use. And I'm going to just turn it round so you can see that, just as before with the jumper, we have a perfectly rounded back neckline. And this is what the inside of the raspberry garment looks like. It's very neat, it's very contained, and there's no sign whatsoever of any cut edges. So now we're moving on to V-necks, and as you can see, I've joined one shoulder. This is a tank top that I'm making this time, and I've already marked the back neckline there because that process doesn't change, and the remaining shoulder seam is open. Now, ordinarily, what would happen is that on a pattern, it would normally tell you to start your decreasing for your neckline at the same time as you start the underarm shaping. I find that really problematic. One, because I often find that this point that you would put your marker, which is either side of 0, is far too deep at the same time as the underarm shaping. And secondly, I actually lose count very often at the same time as I'm decreasing here. So it will say decrease 1 stitch every 2 rows or 4 rows, at the same time that I'm having to decrease 2 stitches at the other side for the armhole. I really do get confused, and it's too precarious, and I often lose count. So therefore, this is another reason why cut and sew, particularly with V-necks, for me, is the best way forward. And secondly, you can recalculate without redrafting your pattern where you want to put your point here, your center point, to do your V-neck shaping. Now, what I tend to do is between the underarm shaping, so where your rows start here, and to the top, I divide it into 4 and I go up on the first quarter. So say for instance, my rows at the underarm between there and right at the top where the shoulder point is, if there is 100 rows, then obviously the first quarter would be at row 25. So therefore this mark would be at 25, and that is where I'm going to put the reference point to start the V-neck. So what you need to do is where your marker is here at your shoulder point, so the back curve neck there has gone right the way round to the shoulder point as we did with the jumper. You get your straight edge ruler and you put that right on that very corner, and then you go straight to the middle section of this marker here. So that would be either side of 0, and make sure it's aligned up. And again, with 2 bold deliberate strikes, go all the way through. And don't worry, you need to extend it further down past this, and then you do the same with the other side. So again, right on this point here, where your shoulder stitch is for the shoulder that hasn't been joined, and then you cross right the way through. And there we are. Now, to make sure that the distance is perfectly equal, we need to measure at this point here, which was my midpoint for the neck, is the same from here to that shoulder and from here to that shoulder. So we're just going to measure that now. And I've got 7.5 centimeters there. And I've got exactly 7.5 centimeters there. Now for this cut and sew, we're not going to be using the overlocker, we're going to be using this sewing machine, and I'm going to talk to you about the machine settings. So we're going to go over to the sewing machine now, and we're going to do 2 lines of zigzag stitching. The first one is going to be directly on top of this chalk line here, and we're going to start at the shoulder that has not been grafted, and then we're going to go down to the mitre point, all the way up around the back neck and finishing there. And then the second one is going to be directly inside, and then it will follow the same path. And this is what it needs to look like. So here on a scrap piece of fabric, I've done an example. And what I've done here is this is the first line, and then directly inside it needs to be this close, not overlapping, but directly in line with each other. And the machine settings need to be a stitch width of 4.5 millimeters and a length of 2 millimeters, and that's about right for this particular project. Now don't be tempted to use a stretch stitch. Although that a stretch stitch is used for knitwear for stretching seams, etc., don't be tempted to use it for this particular project, because the mechanism on the sewing machine when it's making a stretch stitch is that it will move the fabric backwards and forwards. It goes forward 2 stitches and back 1, forward another 2 stitches and then back 1. For this particular project, it would be unsuitable because that actually will stretch the neckline out of shape, and it will notice on the band itself. So for this particular project, the zigzag stitching is the very best method to use if you're not going to be using the overlocking machine. So before you start, ensure that the center mark of the presser foot is exactly in line with the chalk mark, which will mean that the middle of the zigzag stitch will be exactly on the middle of your chalk mark here. So ensure that you start on the top of the jumper. In this case it's a tank top, and make sure that when you do that you're not actually catching the ungrafted shoulder in here. And you don't need to reverse backwards and forwards as you would do with a conventional seam that you're sewing on the machine, and obviously ensure that nothing is caught underneath. If your machine has a dual feed, as this one does here, ensure that it's engaged. If it hasn't, then you might want to release the pressure on the foot here. So start off. And go all the way down following that path. Now we're coming up to the mitre point there, which is where I put the stitch marker in. Try not to get it caught in the zigzag stitch. Just go a couple of stitches at a time, and then you pivot your work, and then you just turn it, and then go up the other side of the V-neck. Make sure, as I showed you earlier, that the middle of the presser foot is in line with the chalk mark. And we're coming up to this point here where it's meeting the back neck marking here. So what we're going to do is just stop at the shoulder point, and then we'll pivot and go round. And there we are, we've come up to the other end of the shoulder there, and now we'll just finish off. And then we'll do the second line of stitching. So here we are, here is the finished zigzag stitching, and yes, I am going to take the shears to it, not this time in a fit of rage, but with purpose. Just before I do that, I'm just going to show you an example on the sample that I did of how close you should be cutting to the zigzag stitches. And here we are. So what you need to do is cut fairly close to the zigzags here and leaving about a 2 millimeter margin, because if you do that on the knitting, it will prevent the edges from curling over. And I need to point out that you should be cutting on the inside of your margin, not on the outside, because believe it or not, I have known people to cut this side of the neckline, and of course you're cutting into the jumper. So what you need to do is to take your shears and make bold, deliberate cuts. Your shears need to be quite sharp. Don't take small cuts, take bold, deliberate cuts all the way down, and then you go to the other side. I'm just going to take these pins out here. I put them in there just to secure it so you could see everything. And you can go down that side now and go all the way down to the mitre point. Now, do not worry that it's going to unravel, because it won't. And then you just go round the back neck. And that's that. And there we are, that is how you do a cut and sew neckline using a standard sewing machine. You can do this equally as well using a round neckline, a front neckline, it makes absolutely no difference. I wanted to show you both methods and they work equally as well. I have used this many times for a round neckline, and you honestly can't tell the difference between this or the overlocking machine. So again, just as before in the last two demonstrations, when you hang this neckline back onto the knitting machine or onto the linker pins, you must make sure that the margin is so minimal that the zigzag stitches is literally just above the line of where the pins or the linker needles are. So the neckband is now on, the remaining shoulder seam has been grafted together. The final thing to do before we press the neckband is to see to the mitre here. So the way to do that is on the inside of the garment you find the stitch marker that you placed at the point of your mitre point when you was knitting your garment there, and you make a crease in the neckband, so like that, and then what you do is you turn it to the side like that, and then exactly precisely on the edge of the neckband you would go at a 60-degree angle across, and you can either do that by hand, you can put it onto the linker pins of the linking machine, or in this case, because I don't have a linking machine at the moment, I'm going to go over to the sewing machine. So here we are then. As you can see, I did a 60-degree angle stitch line there, starting exactly from the point of the neckband where in the middle of the crease met from the marker point, and if I turn it over you can see that there is your mitre, and what we're going to do is just secure this down, and you can put it over to one side. We're going to secure this down with just some hand stitches there. So that's that. What I did is I secured the edge of this mitre down along the edge of the neckband there, and just across there with some tailor's felling stitches. And lastly, here is the tank top. Now this isn't a pretend garment, this is actually a real one. I haven't finished making it yet. I need to put the armbands on and complete the side seams. Now I need to give this some steam. I haven't done that yet. This band is again a plain stocking net band, and it's 12 rows long. And also, just as I did with the raspberry garment, I started off at garment tension and graduated tighter as we went on. So it was 4 rows of each and then reversed the process. And just as before, if I turn that around, as you can see, there is a perfect back neck shaping all the way around as we go along. And this, if you remember, was the one that was done with the sewing machine that I took the shears to. This is what this looks like on the inside. As you can see, there is no sign whatsoever of any of the cut stitches that I made on either the V-neck part here or on the back part of the neckline. This waistcoat I made, and it's actually a tank top pattern, but I altered it. Instead of one front section and a back section, I did the back section, but the front part I divided in half, so there's 2 front parts here. And to get the V-neck, I actually did the same thing as what I did when I showed you how to cut the V-neck for the tank top. I divided the amount of rows from underneath the arm up to the shoulder, and I divided it into quarters. And at the first quarter, I put a stitch marker, and I did the same for the other side. And then I went all the way around the back of the neck and all the way around to the front with the overlocker, and that is how I created this V. And I put a button band on here, and underneath this side are the buttons. And to create this V section here at the bottom, you just put a buttonhole and a button, and then as it's worn, the tension applied to the rib will pull that and you will get this V shape there.